Your life is on a curve right now. The question is it curving upward toward success or downward toward regret? Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin with a simple truth. Growth is never a straight line. Life doesn't reward you instantly for what you do today. It rewards you eventually for what you do consistently. And the sooner you understand this invisible curve that shapes your future, the sooner you can take control of your destiny. But stay with me until the end, because I'm going to share the real secret, the part most people overlook, the element that turns slow progress into unstoppable momentum. Miss that, and you miss everything. Small disciplines multiplied daily create exponential growth. This idea sounds simple, almost too simple. Yet it is one of the most powerful forces shaping your entire future. Most people underestimate it because they are conditioned to only notice dramatic results, big milestones, and visible achievements. What they do not see, and what they rarely appreciate, is the quiet engine behind every success story: consistent, repeated, almost invisible daily actions. Think about a small seed placed into the soil. There's nothing impressive about it. It doesn't roar. It doesn't flash. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there. And if someone walks by the next day, they might think nothing is happening. They might even assume nothing will happen. But deep underground, that seed is working slowly, silently, consistently. It gathers nutrients, strengthens its roots, establishes its foundation. Days pass, weeks pass, and still nothing seems to be happening on the surface. But then one morning, a tiny shoot emerges, barely visible, fragile, weak, but full of promise. That small shoot is the result of countless tiny processes working quietly over time. Now imagine if that seed gave up on day 3 because nothing was happening. That's exactly what most people do with their goals, their health, their mindset, their dreams. They quit too early because the early results are invisible. Small disciplines are like that seed's daily work. They rarely show immediate results, but they are always shaping something beneath the surface. When you read 10 pages of a good book today, your life will look exactly the same tonight. No one will clap for you. No one will praise you. And you might even think it didn't make much difference. But repeat that discipline tomorrow, and the day after, and 100 days after. Suddenly, you've read 1,000 pages. Suddenly, your thinking is sharper, your perspective is broader, your decisions are wiser. And people will look at you and say, "How did you change so much?" They won't realize it wasn't a leap. It was a series of tiny steps done consistently. That is the power of small disciplines. They compound. Compounding is the quiet miracle that turns little into large, slow into fast, and ordinary into extraordinary. Most people are familiar with compounding in money, earning interest on interest. But they forget that compounding is even more powerful in habits. When you repeat a small discipline, you don't just get better at the action. You become the kind of person who performs the action without effort. The discipline becomes identity. And once a habit becomes part of who you are, it begins to produce results on autopilot. A person who saves a small amount consistently becomes someone who is financially aware. A person who exercises a little every day becomes someone whose body naturally gravitates toward health. A person who practices gratitude daily becomes someone whose mind automatically notices opportunities instead of obstacles. It's not about the size of the discipline. It's about the consistency of it. Small disciplines also build something deeper: self-respect. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, even a tiny one, you strengthen your identity. You prove to yourself that you can trust your own word. And the moment you trust yourself, your confidence begins to grow. Confidence doesn't come from motivational speeches or positive thinking. It comes from doing what you said you would do over and over again, even when it doesn't feel exciting. But there's another side to this concept, and it's equally important. Small disciplines create exponential growth, but so do small neglects. Skipping your reading today doesn't hurt you. Skipping your workout doesn't make you unhealthy. Spending a little more than you planned doesn't destroy your financial future. But the danger is that nothing bad happens immediately. The consequences are also invisible at first. And so, the neglect becomes easier the next day, and the next, until the curve that was supposed to rise begins to slowly bend downward. That downward bend doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ring alarms. It shows up months or years later as regret, missed opportunities, loss of energy, lost confidence. That's why small disciplines are not just habits. They are protective forces. They guard your future from the silent damage of small neglects. The real magic happens when you understand that your future is not shaped by big breakthroughs or massive changes, but by the tiny, almost unnoticeable choices you make every single day. The decision to wake up 20 minutes earlier, the decision to learn something new, the decision to write a little, practice a little, improve a little. These choices seem insignificant when viewed individually, but when repeated consistently, they form a pattern, and the pattern becomes a path, and the path eventually becomes a destiny. Small disciplines also create momentum. In the beginning, they feel heavy, inconvenient, uncomfortable. Kind of like pushing a car that has stalled. It takes tremendous effort to get it moving. But once the car begins rolling, you don't need as much force. Momentum does the heavy lifting. That's why the first days of discipline feel the hardest. But if you keep going just a little longer, something shifts. The task becomes easier, your mind resists less, your body adapts, and soon the discipline becomes part of your rhythm. Another overlooked truth is this: small disciplines help you break big goals into manageable pieces. A huge dream can feel overwhelming, but when you reduce it to daily actions, it becomes achievable. Want to write a book? Write 1 paragraph a day. Want to get fit? Start with 10 minutes. Want to improve your income? Study your field for 15 minutes every night. These actions seem small, but over time, they create a gap between you and the person who never started. And that gap widens dramatically as days turn into months. Most importantly, small disciplines teach you patience. They train your mind to think long-term instead of chasing instant gratification. We live in a world hungry for quick results, fast money, fast fame, fast solutions. But the great truth of life is that anything meaningful, anything lasting, anything worth having requires consistent effort over time. The growth curve rewards patience. It rewards persistence. It rewards the person who shows up, even when no one is watching, even when nothing seems to be happening. The person who embraces small disciplines becomes unstoppable. Because once you realize that your future can be shaped by tiny actions you can control, you stop waiting for luck. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop waiting for the perfect moment, and you start building your future one small action at a time. Your growth curve changes the moment you change your philosophy. Everything in life begins with the way you think, the way you interpret the world, the meaning you attach to events, and the beliefs you hold about effort, success, responsibility, and possibility. Most people try to change their circumstances without ever examining the philosophy that created those circumstances in the first place. They change their actions for a week, but keep the same mindset. They try new habits, but maintain old beliefs. And then they wonder why nothing changes. The truth is simple: your actions follow your philosophy. Your habits follow your philosophy. Your results follow your philosophy. If the philosophy stays the same, everything else stays the same. Philosophy is not something mysterious or complicated. It is simply the set of ideas that guide your decisions. It is your personal operating system. It influences how you think about work, how you think about money, how you think about time, how you think about your own potential. For one person, time is something to invest. For another, time is something to kill. For one person, a challenge is an obstacle. For another, it is an opportunity to grow. These two people may face the same situation, yet their outcomes will be completely different because their philosophies push them toward different choices. A person with a weak philosophy sees life as something that happens to them. They believe circumstances control everything. They blame the economy, the weather, their upbringing, or their lack of luck. Their philosophy becomes a chain wrapped around their potential. When opportunities arrive, they don't recognize them because their philosophy is telling them, this isn't for you. When difficulties arise, they collapse quickly because their philosophy says, this is too hard. When someone succeeds, they assume it was luck. When someone fails, they assume it was fate. This mindset guarantees that the growth curve remains flat or declines. A person with a strong philosophy, however, sees life as something they can influence. They believe choices shape the future. They accept responsibility. They search for solutions. They treat setbacks as lessons. Their philosophy gives them power. It gives them courage. It makes them active instead of passive. Even if they start at the bottom, this mindset pushes their growth curve upward because they are always learning, always adjusting, always moving. What's interesting is that philosophy is not something you declare. It's something you live. It shows up in the smallest decisions. When you choose discipline over comfort, that's philosophy. When you choose learning over entertainment, that's philosophy. When you choose responsibility over excuses, that's philosophy. Every choice is a vote for the philosophy that guides your life. Even if you don't realize it, your philosophy is shaping your days. Most people develop their philosophy accidentally. They pick up ideas from parents, friends, media, culture, and environment without questioning whether these ideas are serving them. They inherit beliefs like, money is hard to earn, people don't change. Success is for the lucky, I'm not meant for more. Dreams are unrealistic, or it's too late for me. These ideas may have been spoken casually by someone years ago, but they become walls inside the mind. And as long as those walls remain, growth becomes impossible. The good news is that philosophy can be changed. One new idea can override 100 old ones. One moment of clarity can rewrite a lifetime of limitation. It begins the moment you say to yourself, maybe there is another way to see this. Because when you challenge your old beliefs, you open the door to new possibilities. And once new possibilities enter, new behaviors naturally follow. Your philosophy defines the standard you set for your life. If your philosophy tells you it's okay to give half effort, you will. If your philosophy tells you it's acceptable to quit when you're uncomfortable, you will. If your philosophy tells you mistakes make you a failure, you'll avoid trying. But if your philosophy tells you success is earned through discipline, you will discipline yourself. If your philosophy tells you failure is feedback, you'll use it to improve. If your philosophy tells you every day is a chance to become more, you'll start treating your days differently. Philosophy is also the filter through which you interpret information. If your philosophy is weak, even good advice sounds useless. You'll hear a valuable idea, but your mind will say, I already know that, or that won't work for me, or maybe someday. But with a strong philosophy, the same idea becomes a tool, a strategy, a possibility. You'll say, how can I use this? How can this help me grow? The idea enters a fertile mind, and the growth curve begins to bend upward. The moment your philosophy changes, the world looks different. You begin noticing opportunities that were invisible before. You start attracting people who match your new mindset. You start taking actions you once avoided. You start aiming higher, expecting more, and believing deeper. And because you think differently, you make different decisions. Those decisions create different days. Those days create different months. And those months reshape your entire future. Changing your philosophy doesn't require force. It requires exposure. You change your philosophy by exposing yourself to better ideas, books, mentors, experiences, challenges, conversations that raise your standard. You absorb new ways of thinking, and your mind begins to shift. The beliefs that once held you back start losing their power. The stories you told yourself start fading, and a new narrative begins to take shape, one that supports growth instead of limiting it. Sometimes a single sentence can change someone's entire life. One powerful idea can ignite a spark the old philosophy cannot extinguish. Suddenly, the person who once doubted themselves starts believing again. The person who once settled for less begins reaching higher. The person who once feared change begins embracing it. And that shift is not magic. It is philosophy realigning the direction of the growth curve. The difference between a flat life and a rising life is often one new philosophy adopted at the right time. Once it clicks, everything else starts falling into place. Habits change. Focus changes. Priorities change, energy changes, and the results begin to follow the new pattern. The curve that once seemed frozen begins to move again, slowly at first, then faster as the new philosophy solidifies. Consistency beats intensity because the curve of growth is shaped not by what you do occasionally, but by what you repeat long enough for it to take root. The world often praises intensity, the big push, the dramatic effort, the sudden transformation. But what truly creates lasting change is quiet, steady repetition. Intensity is exciting, but consistency is effective. Intensity burns bright, but consistency burns long. And life rewards long-burning flames far more than brief bursts of heat. When someone decides to change their life, their first instinct is usually intensity. They say, I'm going to work out for 2 hours every day. Or, I'm going to read a book every week. Or, I'm going to completely transform everything overnight. And for a few days, they do it. But intensity is exhausting. It drains the mind, the body, the spirit. It demands too much too quickly. And when life gets busy, or motivation fades, or obstacles show up, intensity collapses. That's why most people start strong and finish nowhere. Consistency, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't demand perfection, only repetition. It flows like a small stream that never stops, carving valleys into mountains over time. Consistency doesn't overwhelm you. It asks for a small piece of your day, not your entire energy. And because it's small, you can do it even when you're tired, even when you're stressed, even when motivation disappears. That's why consistency wins. It survives the ordinary days, not just the exciting ones. Think of a person who decides to get in shape. One person goes to the gym for 3 hours with great intensity, lifting until their muscles shake. But they are so sore and discouraged the next day that they skip, then skip again, then quit. Another person goes for 15 minutes a day, every day, without fail. A short walk, a few stretches, a bit of strength work, nothing dramatic. But after weeks and months, the second person becomes stronger and healthier because they created momentum. The first person attempted a revolution. The second person built a routine, and routines always defeat revolutions. Consistency builds identity. Every time you repeat an action, your mind begins to attach that action to who you are. Read every day, even for 10 minutes, and soon you see yourself as a reader. Exercise daily, even lightly, and you begin to see yourself as someone who takes care of their health. Save a small amount of money regularly, and you start seeing yourself as someone who manages finances wisely. Identity shapes behavior. Once you become the kind of person who does something consistently, you no longer rely on motivation. You rely on identity. That's the true power of consistency. Intensity tries to force results. Consistency allows results to unfold. Intensity says, I must achieve this now. Consistency says, I will become the kind of person who achieves this eventually. Intensity is fueled by emotion. Consistency is fueled by commitment. Emotion rises and falls like waves, but commitment remains steady like the tide that pulls the ocean forward inch by inch. It never disappears. And because it never disappears, it eventually delivers transformation. There is also a psychological reason consistency wins. The human mind is resistant to overload, but responsive to repetition. When you push too hard, the mind feels threatened and rebels. But when you take small, manageable steps, the mind adapts and accepts the new pattern. This is why intense resolutions fail, but small habits succeed. The brain naturally absorbs what is repeated, not what is forced. Consistency also creates trust with yourself. Every time you keep a small promise, your self-respect grows. You prove to yourself that you can be relied upon, that your word has value. This internal trust is the foundation of self-confidence. A person who trusts themselves can commit to bigger goals because they know they will follow through. A person who breaks their own promises repeatedly loses belief in their own ability to change. And without belief, no amount of intensity can create lasting results. What most people miss is that consistency creates compounding. When you repeat a small action over and over, it begins to build upon itself. Skills sharpen. Strength deepens. Knowledge expands. The first days feel slow. The first weeks feel invisible. But somewhere down the line, the curve begins to rise. Suddenly the progress becomes noticeable. Then the progress accelerates. And eventually the person who chose consistency outruns the person who chose intensity by a mile. It's not that they worked harder, it's that they worked longer, steadier, smarter. Intensity is short-term effort. Consistency is long-term direction. A burst of effort can start you, but only consistency can take you anywhere meaningful. Intensity might get you through a door, but consistency builds the entire path on the other side. Sometimes people say they lack motivation, but what they really lack is a system that survives low motivation days. Consistency is that system. It doesn't depend on inspiration. It depends on repetition. It depends on structure. It depends on habits that fit into daily life, not dreams that disappear under pressure. Consistency also teaches patience, and patience is one of the rarest forms of wisdom. When you choose consistency, you accept that growth takes time, that mastery takes time, that transformation takes time. You stop expecting life to reward you instantly. You stop demanding quick results. You begin to value the slow accumulation of strength, the gradual sharpening of skill, the steady increase of capacity. And this mature mindset keeps you stable when progress feels slow. You don't quit because you understand that slow progress is still progress, and that progress stacked daily becomes unstoppable. In relationships, consistency builds trust. In skills, consistency builds mastery. In finances, consistency builds wealth. In health, consistency builds vitality. In mindset, consistency builds resilience. Everything meaningful in life responds to steady effort. Nothing meaningful responds to random bursts. The person who writes one page every day will write more books than the person who waits for inspiration. The person who practices a craft for 15 minutes daily will surpass the person who trains intensely only when they feel motivated. The person who consistently improves 1% each day will outgrow the person who occasionally tries to improve 20%. Growth is not a race. It is a rhythm, and the rhythm is powered by consistency. Life's results are rarely dramatic at first. They are quiet. They are subtle. They whisper long before they shout. And consistency allows you to keep going long enough to hear the whisper turn into a roar. If you want me to expand the hook, introduction, or full speech in deeper detail, just tell me.